All right, this video is going to be for English 1 standard student, or sorry, English 1 honor students. This is going to cover your first common lit passage. But before we get into your common lit passage, I want to show you a few things about your notes because this is your first video for the week. As always, in your notes, you can find your literary terms. Updating from the overview video, I think I may have told you that the quiz on these 10 terms is going to be on Friday. I did have to change that. Technically, Friday is the first day of spring break, not the end of Friday. So we are going to take this quiz, guys, on Thursday. 10 literary terms. You just need to be able to know the definitions. What we're going to do later in this video is incorporate these literary terms into your common lists and talk about how they apply, things of that nature. Okay, so you'll have some context for these words too, not just, hey, here are some words and some definitions. We're going to talk about a little bit of why we read nonfiction as a genre and what is nonfiction. So, compared to everything else that we've read so far for this semester, for the most part, things that we've read this semester, nonfiction as a genre serves as informational text, true works based on true life events, based on true occurrences, factual data, evidence, information. We've read some nonfiction, but this particular unit is only going to be nonfiction works. So we'll go ahead and get into that. When you're reading your nonfiction units, the way we're going to approach our common lits is I'm going to be using what we call a thieves approach. And this particular slide breaks down a thieves approach for you. So when you're doing a thieves approach, you consider the title first. And then if your passage has subheadings, you look at the subheadings and you kind of answer those questions. You look at the introduction, every first sentence, visuals, and vocabulary, and end of passage questions, and then lastly, a summary. So we're going to do this thieves approach with our first text today. And so for honor students, the first text you have is The Complexity of Fear. Really quickly, I'm going to back out of our notes and I want to go to that common lit passage just so you can see it. So The Complexity of Fear, Mary C. Lamia, PhD. This particular article is going to talk to you about fear, what does fear look like, and how researchers and people who study cognitive and like brain functioning understand fear, and therefore how the rest of the world understands fear and how we learn to cope, how we experience it, how we deal with it in the aftermath. So if we're looking at the thieves approach, the first thing is to consider the title, The Complexity of Fear. What does that title tell us? Well, clearly we're going to be talking about fear, but what does that word complexity mean? Complexity actually means the variations, the differences, how technical something gets, and how rounded an idea can be. So it's not simple at all. It is complex. It is multifaceted, and there's a bunch of different things that go into it. So in order to understand fear, part of the article that you should have read and what you're going to learn is that there's one answer to what is fear. And that's what this kind of article tries to address. So, in terms of headings, the article doesn't really use headings, except for at the end, there's a title called references. These references you'll see with most nonfiction works that we read. You're going to see references of some sort, whether it be a bibliography page, a works cited page, footnotes, whatever the case may be. And this is citing and giving credit to sources. Extremely important because factual data and information must be cited, as we've learned and studied throughout the semester. So our nonfiction articles do give credit where credit is due. Next, the introduction. For this particular passage, the introduction focuses on catching the reader's interest by getting them to self-apply their experiences with fear, but also by pulling in factual data, factual vocabulary about fear and about some of these other key terms that they're going to use. Now, every first sentence of this particular passage I left blank because it's a little bit um, different, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You'll see every first sentence looks different in each paragraph. A lot of this is to show progression and show development between the text, introduce opposing ideas. And so I'll write all that in there. But just so you know, when you look at it, um, understanding the passage and breaking it down, if you can understand every first sentence, you've got a pretty good handle on what each paragraph is going to be about. Then we have visuals. With visuals, they also wanted to include vocabulary, so don't forget that. But with this particular passage, they do have a visual, and it's right here in the center of your page. It's a pretty alarming visual. You can tell based on the way that the individual in this particular image looks, they must be experiencing some type of fear. So again, catching the reader's interest is part of that visual there, but also establishing connections. End of passage questions. We will get to those because we have a common lit to this. It does have end of passage questions. So we're going to discuss answering those a little bit. And then a summary. Overall, what is this article? What is it trying to accomplish? And by way of summary, what I can give you is that fear is more complex than we originally thought, and it actually encompasses many different emotions and different responses. So you'll learn that in reading this particular article. So I've got a note for your short answer question here. It is going to be your first question. So let's go to those. Your assessment questions. According to the author, what is fear? Support your answer with evidence. Guys, remember, as always, make sure that if it's asking you to support your answer with evidence, you quote the passage somewhere. So basically, it's asking you to give a definition of the word fear. Not only should you quote the passage where it says fear is X, Y, and Z, but you should also explain that, break it down, and give context for your readers in your own words. Okay? And then look at some of your other assessment questions after your common lit. It's going to ask you about things like purpose, phobias, which are discussed in the passage, reactions to fear. This expresses the distinction between fear and anxiety. And then a quote to support that question 5, what's the difference between fear and anxiety? So when you're looking at your thieves approach, what are these end of passage questions help you understand about fear? And it should be, going back to the title, the complexity of fear. Fear is not just fear. Clearly, they want you to understand its definition, all of its different facets. They want you to understand phobias, but they also want you to understand the difference between fear and anxiety, because all these things are different, and they help develop our understanding of what fear is and what fear means to people. Okay? So we have our passage, we have our thieves approach completed. I want to go back and touch base with some of these literary terms. We don't see alliteration in this passage. This was more of a poetry term, but you will see it occasionally pop up in the nonfiction text because it's a catchy way of getting the reader's attention. Not necessarily an autobiography or biography here. We're not talking about someone's life in particular. We don't have a chronological order here, but this was with our Eleanor Roosevelt passage that we had last week that you guys should remember. Logos, ethos, and pathos are going to be a pretty big deal in this particular passage. You should be able to kind of get an idea of those and understanding. So logos is going to be logic, the appeal to facts. And anytime you see a citation giving credit to, well, not necessarily a citation. Let me back that up. Anytime you see a percentage number, a data point, where perhaps it may say X number of people. They mentioned a car accident in here. Where was it? So they mentioned a car accident. And they mentioned how people who had been in a car accident describe that, here it is, frequently describe that for many months, weeks after the car accident, they feel like they're going to get into another one. If they'd have thrown in a percentage saying that, 75% of people who have been in car accidents have a fear of getting into a second car accident, that would be logos. That would be an appeal to logic. But then we also have ethos. Ethos is credibility and ethics. So that's where we're going to look at these particular citations, and we see these people are being cited for having said something or being known for have done something in the realm of psychology and the development on fear and anxiety, and then you have their references down here. This is credible resources, and this is the appeal to ethics or ethos. We establish credibility, we establish that this is a reliable source, and by providing information from this reliable source, we get our audiences to believe what we're trying to get them to understand. And then the last one is pathos. Your introduction paragraph uses a lot of pathos because it starts with these ideas of getting the reader to put themselves in this situation. Have you, if you're in this particular situation and this is the experience you have, that's pathos because they appeal to your sense of emotion and your feelings. By putting you in this situation, the author grabs your attention and appeals to your sense of self and your emotions and gets you to buy into the rest of the information that they're getting ready to push out to you. Okay? We don't have any repetition or satire or speech in this particular one, but it may come up in later passages. So we're just going to leave those right where they are for now. And that's going to be your video lecture for the complexity of fear honors. Make sure that you get this passage done and turned in by Tuesday, April 7th at 11:59 p.m. And don't forget that your quiz on your literary terms is on Thursday now, Thursday, April 9th.